Thank you for joining us today for our Utility Object Detection 2.0 webinar with our friends over at Kimley-Horn. Going to give everybody a couple of seconds to pile on in here. We have a packed webinar today. We had over 200 registrants, so really excited to get things kicked off today. While we're waiting, feel free to use the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And that's the beauty of webinars and being remote here. You can kind of tune in from anywhere. So I'll be interested to see where everybody's tuning in from today. Feel free to introduce yourselves. We got Texas, Colorado, Austin, Texas. Nice. A lot of Texas. California, Nashville, Pittsburgh. All right. Wow. We got Oklahoma, Columbus, go Bucks, Nashville, Tennessee. Right on, right on. I'm going to start and kick things off here. But before we dive in, I just want to welcome all the newcomers just learning about 4M. We're so glad that you're here joining us today. And if you've been here before, welcome back. We're excited that you're here for another thought-provoking conversation. For all you newcomers in particular, just a quick rundown or breakdown of who we are at 4M. 4M is the first utility AI platform built for infrastructure teams. 4M delivers instant, reliable utility data you can trust and verify at every stage of planning, design, and pre-construction. Our centralized mapping solution compiles millions of scattered public utility records into one easy-to-use map, saving you time and money on traditional record research, extensive field investigations, and costly surprises. So think of us as an on-demand, comprehensive utility repository. Every utility, one platform, AI-powered, human verified. So also joining me today, as you can see on screen, is my friend and colleague, Roz Ezra, the head of sales at 4M, and Chris Howard, the STU division lead at Kimley-Horn. Really excited to dig into our conversation here in a bit, but a few housekeeping items before we jump in. As always, this will be recorded. This on-demand recording will be sent to you after the webinar. And if you have any questions at all during this session, please drop them in the Q&A below. We'll use the Q&A section for the questions. Feel free to chat back and forth in the chat, but all the questions, try to put in the Q&A. It will help make it easier for me to spot the questions that are coming in. For today's agenda, we're going to hop into getting to know 4M a little bit better and Kimley-Horn. Then we're going to dive into a live demo of 4M's object detection in action. We're going to then hop over to a customer story where our friends over at Kimley-Horn will share how they're using 4M today. And then we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A after party, since this is an action-packed 30-minute webinar here. If we don't have enough time to answer all your questions, we're going to save time at the end of this webinar for an after party where Chris and Roz will be answering all of your burning questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic on over to my friend, Roz Ezra.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. And thank you very much, Chris Howard, for being here and facilitating this, of course. I'll take a moment maybe to introduce myself and also the journey that I had with 4M and also, the journey about 4M. And then I'll swing it over to you, Chris, to talk a little about yourself. A few words about myself. Roz Ezra, based in Austin, Texas, our headquarters. I'm heading our go-to-market efforts here across the U.S. And so we started the journey of 4M as actually former officers of the Combat Engineering Corps, trained to deal with landmines, explosive ordnance, IEDs identification, and so forth. And then we shifted towards this new approach of underground detection, overhead detection of utility stuff across the U.S. Over the course of the past maybe handful of years, we were able to grow the business from a handful of employees to a little bit over 100 and raise $75 million today to execute the vision we have. I think that, the easiest way to describe what is 4M is, everyone is familiar with Google Maps that shows us or provides the visibility of what is on surface. And I think that the easiest way to explain of what is 4M is that we are on the journey of becoming the Google Maps of the subsurface, while providing accessibility to reliable utility data at the lowest cost point of the project lifecycle, from the pursuit phase and all the way up throughout the pre-construction phases. Working with a couple main segments of clients across the industry. One of them is within the AEC sectors, companies like Kimley-Horn, for instance, and all the way up through the owners within DOTs, utility owners across the US. So that's a little bit about myself and also about 4M. Chris, I'll swing it over to you.
Yeah, I'm Chris Howard with Kimley-Horn. I run our STU division here. Just started the STU division here not too long ago with the legislation that passed in Colorado. Kimley-Horn really started as a traffic organization in North Carolina some time ago and has spread throughout the United States, expanding all its services from every civil discipline. Some of the things that we really pride ourselves on is our exceptional client service, and that's one of the things that 4M's really helped us increase with our clients. is being able to perform services that are valuable to them.
Well, thanks, Chris. So now I suggest, Chris, how about we kick this off with talking about the big elephant in the room? I mean, we have a problem, right? This is why we're here, essentially, to talk about the problem and hopefully come with an interesting approach to solve it. Chris, when you see this slide, what pops in your mind? Does this sound or look familiar to you? Let's talk a little bit about this. Chris, you and me, we know each other for the past maybe 4 or 5 years or so. You're a SUE expert. You're a leader within the industry. How would you describe or talk about this, the big elephant here?
The big elephant for us is you know, in a proposal space, how do you allocate time, manpower to something that hasn't landed? And the biggest problem is getting boots on the ground, getting somebody out there, looking at the site, and that takes a considerable effort, especially before, you know, you've won a project, and being able to identify problems beforehand has been really invaluable. The traditional status quo of, you know, sending people out there with boots on the ground and getting trucks out there and really doing this work and being able to accurately and efficiently help your clients it can be time consuming. It takes a lot of coordination, and we've seen we've seen a change, you know, recently, especially with you guys in the last several years that we've been chatting. We've seen that space moving, and it's easier and more efficient for us to eliminate that upfront cost and be able to accurately do it without having a bunch of you know, extra time in the front end of things. So that's really how I've seen it. Is the status quo has really been getting out there and putting people out there and spending all that time even before you know you win something. So it's been a struggle to, you know, really effectively do that without really causing a lot of overhead and a lot of time for our clients as well as ourselves. Being able to be ahead of the game has been invaluable.
Yeah, I think, Chris, you mentioned something like you said that a couple times, actually, status quo. And, you know, many people are asking us, well, who's your competition? Especially, you know, we're backed by VCs, venture capital. When they're doing their due diligence, the first thing they're trying to see is the competitive landscape, right? So who's the competition that Forum has? And to be honest, by the way, unfortunately, there's no direct competition. There's very indirect competition, which is essentially status quo, as you mentioned. And let's maybe try, Chris, to unpack status quo. I'll give you my take based on what we're hearing from clients and from the market. And I'm happy also to, if you can unpack that from your point of view. We're hearing that in order to get access to reliable information very fast, what the status quo forces the market to do essentially is use 811 or call centers and then wait anything from hours to days to weeks to receive data from the owners. Maybe 50% of them will respond. The 50% that do respond provide the market with schematics, blueprints, maybe pen and papers, and so forth. And then the action item from that point will be to assemble everything together, to massage the data, to create a base map that is not even vetted yet. And then hence, or after that, we need to send people to the field, whether it is surveyors, GPR, and then SUE comes to play all the way up to quality level A. And only then you really know what is there. But this process takes essentially weeks or months to get there. And it's highly expensive and manual intensive. This is my point of view on the status quo. What would you think? And what are the challenges within that?
Yeah, I mean, really the time and efficiency of the status quo is probably our biggest concern. I mean, you know, even in a state like Colorado where we have laws that dictate, you know, responsiveness, it's still not a real-time responsiveness. And oftentimes SUE or utility information is needed almost immediately. We're not able to effectively do that sometimes with the status quo because of the time frame that we're given. Oftentimes we're going to need that before the 10-day mark. Like you said, oftentimes we get maybe 50% response from 811. Oftentimes it is schematic, which is helpful in some regard, but we don't really know what we're looking for if it's schematic. We just know that it's there. and being able to really narrow down that time and narrow down what we're looking for really changes how we can approach the project immediately versus, hey, we're gonna be waiting a month for this information. Then we can get you, an accurate, somewhat accurate depiction of what's going on. Where when we're moving into this space, it's a far different experience, not only for us being more efficient, but being able to respond and produce that exceptional client service very quickly. So I believe that yeah, really that time frame of the status quo is really what hurts a lot of us in the end.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And maybe this is a good transition point to talk a little about your point of view on on using AI or particularly 4M. Again, Chris, we know each other, or you know 4M essentially for the past 4 or so years. Do you mind kind of walking us through the thought process you had when evaluating 4M, and how did this approach, correspond with the objectives of making this change that you're talking about? Maybe a short answer before we transition here.
Yeah. In evaluating 4M, I guess the biggest problem we would run into is, even when we were using the status quo, the biggest problem you run into is accuracy. How do you properly address client needs when the information you're given isn't accurate enough to really pinpoint what might go wrong? That's kind of been that invaluable piece, is being able to deliver on that client service before the project even gets going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes complete sense. You know what, Chris, obviously the audience that we have here, I think we have a couple hundred people that may be listening to us. They're not here to talk about the problem a lot. I mean, it was a good context for now, but I think this is a good transition point to talk a little about our approach and how this is different than the status quo. We really unpack the status quo. Let's take a couple minutes, maybe 4 minutes top, to talk about how we're doing what we're doing, this technology, and how this differs from the status quo. And then we'll use the time to demo the product, and you will be on the spotlight showcasing how you guys are using 4M. So in a nutshell about our technology, it took us about 4-ish years to build something that we call an AI conflation engine. AI is the buzzword, machine learning and so forth. I'm hoping here to simplify this process and explain this in the words of 7-year-old. Essentially, we build this AI engine to essentially pre-map the whole country. And what this means is that we're training our algorithms using AI against any piece of information that is available in the public environment. Think blueprints, construction documents that were released in the past decades. Think GIS servers and so forth. Everything that's pre-synthesized automatically and populated within the back end of our system. And then secondly, we have here a problem. Exactly, Chris, as you spoke about, the records are not good. This is maybe the problem that we have, or the baseline of the problem, because they're outdated, they're inaccurate, not reliable. And essentially the second component of our system, exactly because of this reason, is about using machine learning to detect and validate using imagery science to really identify surface features that indicate presence of utilities. So what happens here, we're using machine learning to identify surface features automatically, which helps us to do two different things. One of them is to vet the records that we pre-collected. Hence, we're able to adjust deviations of the records because we talked about that. The records are not accurate. Secondly, it also helps us to identify abandoned lines, undocumented lines that never appeared in the records, while also applying engineering logic. And so the third component will be ensuring that the database is maintained and constantly up to date. The system essentially refreshes itself on a monthly basis, and this is our way to ensure that the data maintains up to date. Now, as Chris Garofalo from our side indicated, the purpose of this session is essentially to really dive in and focus on our newest object detection capabilities. I want to use the time here to explain the technology here exactly the same that I explained this technology to my 7-year-old. So I hope this will simplify the process. Think about an engine that is able to identify a point using imagery and science, and we'll talk about the machine learning and how this works. But let's say we have a point. The second layer is to identify that this point is related to a utility. So now this point becomes a utility object. From the object, we now need to classify the object. So this object is no longer a pole. This is right now classified as an electric pole. Now, if we were able to do this so far, we're able to unpack and gather additional information that indicate the metadata or the attributes of this pole. Perhaps what is the height? Who's the utility owner and so forth. And then if we're able to do that on one object, why can't we do that on additional objects and create a pattern? Now, if we have a pattern, why can't we create a system? If we have a system of objects, why can't we create a network? And this is the process of how the system is built. This is the architecture behind the system, from identifying one point to an object to classification, and from that to assemble a system that expands to a network. This helps us to zoom in from the very highest resolution and all the way up to see the broader picture. I also mentioned before we go to the demo, I also mentioned that we're using imagery science. So how are we able to identify that point and classify? Essentially, as I mentioned, we're using machine learning based object detection algorithms to identify those surface features. You can see here right now a snapshot of the output of our system. We can see here various types of surface features. And so what happens here behind the scenes, every single surface feature that our system was able to identify is verified throughout multiple different angles or verification angles, whether it is from street view, aerial images, satellite, horizontal, vertical images, as we can see here, an aerial image, as well as if we can see this specific traffic light over here, traffic pole, we can see that every single green arrow or green line represents a different verification angle that our system was able to identify. Hence, we have a very high degree of precision and coverage or certainty that this traffic pole is exactly here. A few examples of how this really looks on the back end. So we can see that every single traffic pole or every single surface feature has multiple different verification angles. One example, second example, third example, fourth example. So we have a very high degree as described that this is exactly there, or the objects are spot on. You know, Chris, many times our people, the market will ask us, well, is this precise? Is this accurate? Is this perfect? The answer is no. It will never be perfect. Nothing is going to be perfect. AI is not here to replace engineers. AI is here to empower engineers to make decisions properly, fast, and very efficiently. But this is the data we're collecting right now. This is the data we have right now. Our technology stands at 95% precision accuracy or precision rate. This means that every 20 surface features that we will identify, 19 of them will be spot on. So this is the answer to our accuracy level or precision level. I hope this makes sense. And I think obviously we have, I'm sure people will pop in with many different questions and so forth. But just before that, Chris, we promised also to kind of demo the product, and then I'll swing it over to you to talk a little about how your experience is using Forum. I just now transitioned to the product. Can you just maybe give me the thumbs up that we can all see the product right now? Chris?
Yep, looks good.
Thank you very much. All right, so this is what the product essentially looks like. We'll go through a maybe 1-2 minute demo really quickly. Chris, you had a project that used us in Boulder, Colorado, northwest to Denver. Let's just go to this area and let's just populate all the data we have under the hood here. And this is essentially the user interface that the user will see once the user uses the product. I'll go ahead and create a project. A user can either upload a shape or KMZ or a file to the ArcGIS file to the system, or can just draw a project by yourself as a user, which is what I will do right now. I'll create a polygon. We'll call this webinar, and we'll just pick a couple fields here. And then we'll wait maybe a couple of seconds, and behind the scenes right now, the system is pre-populate or populating automatically all the data we have under the hood in this particular area. So again, we talked about this being as the Google Maps of the subsurface. We can see that off the bat, we were able to identify sewage lines, water lines, electric lines, energy lines, and so forth, everything within the area of interest really instantly. Now, before we dive into the data, this box just popped up over here that tells us that behind the scenes, the user is able to trigger the system, the machine learning or the object detection capabilities to scan the area and identify automatically surface features. Now, this process will take anything between 30 minutes to maybe 2 hours max. We don't have the time to wait for that, obviously. And I'll just transition over to the project that, Chris, you created actually a month ago or so. And essentially, this is exactly the same area of interest, the project that Chris drew. And this is exactly the output of the system the user will receive once the object detection finishes this process. Again, so 30 minutes to maybe 2 hours of a turnaround. Now, zooming in here to this particular area, before I just transitioned, we were able to see the line work. Right now, as a user, I got back to the system, and now we can see all those surface features or all those points popped up. Now, what this tells us here is that every surface feature is backed by its visual evidence. We can literally see here why or how our system was able to capture this information while linking over to Street View to really see the visual evidence yourself. So we can see the manhole that we detected, as well as in many cases, actually, our system is also able to identify additional visual clues. So we can see here the spray marks in this particular case. And no one really needs to be genius to understand that, hey, the sewage line goes over here. And this is a really good vehicle to essentially validate or vet the information that the form was able to pre-synthesize. Maybe a couple last words in this regard. The product will also break down the data by all the different sectors above and underground, all the different utility owners within the area of interest, lines within the right-of-way or outside of the right-of-way, lines that intersect with parcels, whether it is residential, commercial parcels, the land value, and so forth, and all the lines and all the line intersections or the crossings within the area of interest. The last component, the system will also provide us a quick write-up using AI. So this is a quick summary from a risk mitigation standpoint, indicates all the different risks within the area of interest. This is very important when we're doing early planning, conceptual studies, and pursuits and so forth. Chris, we don't have much time, but I guess this is the main component of this webinar. Hey, Chris, would you mind talking a little bit how you are using the product and maybe even sharing a story?
Yeah, I'd love to. We recently were awarded a contract for Aspen Airport, and can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. The biggest challenge we have is airports don't like to close. They don't want people running around on their runway trying to figure these things out. And we also had multiple layers they kept adding to this project. So sending people out over and over again and having to shut down an airport so we can access it and really get information that we need in order to properly propose on it, this became invaluable. The object detection really allowed us to identify how much work we needed to do without having to shut down the airport, which was not going to happen in any way. And so we were able to precisely propose on this project without having to put boots on a runway or the taxiway. And they also, as we were going through this process and identifying all these different objects, other questions came up and they were wanting to add to the project as we were going. And like we talked about in that status quo time frame, that would propel this into a whole new time frame. And with it being Aspen Airport, there's a very limited time that we have to get out there and be able to effectively propose on these things. And so we were able to adjust how we proposed on it in real time and be able to work with the airport and say, hey, we're seeing these things and we're identifying these areas and being able to that schedule of when they're going to have to close to expand the runway, we've been able to reduce considerably because we have all the exact information we're looking for in order to reduce that schedule, not only for our investigation, but for the construction. They're able to be more pointed in their how they attack it and how they're going to build it. So this became wildly invaluable, not only for us, but for the client to really evaluate what the best use of their time and how to do that within the time frame they can close. So this really propelled us to the front of Aspen's decision making, because we were able to identify not only things that we can't go out there and physically do, but things that they now found that were different than what they had previously thought and had expanded on the project because of it.
Mm-hmm. Chris, this is really interesting and very valuable. I appreciate that. You talked about your client just before we maybe wrap up this demo. How does this impact the positioning you have with your clients, for instance?
So, Kimley, like I said before, prides itself on its exceptional client services. being able to show them the extent of their project and being able to identify this early on really made a huge difference in who was awarded the project. Being able to identify this stuff that early and us being able to adjust our different designs really made a huge difference for them because of their time constraints. They couldn't have other people trying to bid on this as they expanded their work. So that really put us in the forefront of, we were prepared for doing the design and expanding the design in real time.
So listening to you carefully, and I'm kind of thinking about use cases. You're talking a lot about maybe a couple different use cases, if I'm reading you right. One of them will be essentially for business development and the pursuit phase, to know more than others and maybe gain a competitive edge. And then secondly is maybe a planning tool to enable crews before they go to the field with a base map. And then third, maybe is a QAC tool as part of your maybe SOP, or even as part of from a risk mitigation or from a safety standpoint. Is that how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We not only use this in the proposal phase, we use it in design, and we use it in construction. We run a map at every phase because, like you said, it's constantly updating. We want to make sure that we have real-time info. Oftentimes, in a project, it'll get shelved and you've got to start that whole process over again. We're able to adjust what we're doing immediately without having to go through the status quo procedures all over again.
Well, this is really amazing information. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts here, Chris. Well, I know we're up time. We have maybe 30 seconds. I do want to be a good player here. Chris, I'll let you maybe chime in here.
Yeah, we're getting some good questions coming in here. And like Ross said, we know we had this set for 30 minutes. For those that can stay on a little bit longer, we're going to be answering your burning questions that you've been putting in the chat here throughout. So if you guys can stay on for a little while longer, we're going to go through some of the questions that we've been coming in here. So we have a couple questions that I think, Roz, you would be the best for answering. One of which comes from Louise Sanchez. How do you verify utility drawings accuracy if the owners of the utilities know that the drawings are not accurate? How about utilities that do not want to release sensitive info due to location or criticality?
I think that's a really good question. And a lot of people are asking this question. Maybe it's the first question, to be honest. And so if you maybe recall, the way I described the system and how it is architected is that we don't rely on utility data partnerships. We found a way to bypass the challenge of getting access to the utility owner's data. By the way, you can imagine what it means if our mission is to build the Google Maps of the subsurface across the US. We cannot just rely on getting access to all the data within all the different utility owners across the US. It will take us maybe decades to get to that point. So we were forced to find a way to bypass this challenge while relying as a baseline, or just for the baseline, to rely on the public data that is available in the public environment. And so the AI engine is trained against the data that is available in the public environment. Yet it lacks the data. It's inaccurate. It's not reliable. And hence, this is exactly where the imagery science component comes to play, about detecting and validating the information. And again, as I described, this helps us to do the two different things I described before. One of them is to correct the deviations or adjust the deviations of the records we pre-collected, but also to identify undocumented lines. So closing the loop here to the question, even if we have access to the utility owner's data, and even if we don't really need it, because we are able to identify this information regardless of the access to the utility owner's data.
Thank you, Roz. I hope that added some clarity for you, Louise. Another question that came in, can you provide SUE info for all 50 states?
Yeah, that's maybe a really good question. Chris, I'd love you to chime in after my quick answer, because one clarification point, we're not a supervisor. Forum is not an engineering firm. This is not our role here. Our role is to provide reliable data, utility data, instantly, efficiently to engineers, to empower the engineers. Yes, we can provide our data in all 50 states. We have 12, or next week it's going to be 13 states where we pre-map the whole states. That we also have on-demand services where we're able to provide the data ad hoc in all 50 states. However, we're not a supervisor. Chris, I would love actually if you would chime in and talk about how you see Forum correspond with the SUE workflows. I think that's a really good topic because we're not really replacing SUE, but more empowering the process.
Yeah, that's a good point to touch on, Roz. You know, per legislation in ASC 3822, you know, the SUE person is responsible for all data collection. So as we're going through our workflow, we don't use 4M to plop into a drawing and use that as doctrine. We still have to go through the processes that ASC requires, that the state legislation requires. 4M is really great on the proposal side, so we can accurately propose on it. During the design phase, we use 4M as almost a quality check to make sure that we're capturing all the information we can, because as the supervisor, we need to give as much information about existing utilities as possible. So we use that to check against what we're seeing in the field, what we're collecting in the field. When we go out for, you know, quality level C, which is field verification, we've got 4M in hand on an iPad, and we're walking these different areas as we see on 4M. And oftentimes there's things, you know, that you and I have both discussed over the years, that sometimes there are misses that 4M, like you said, it's not perfect. But there's also times where we're seeing something with 4M that the utility locator might have missed, or they weren't able to access. And so we're able to go back and get those permissions as needed in order for our field crews to go back out and get that information. And then at the end of the day, when the project's finished, we're using it to check and make sure that we've captured everything we can and give as much possible information into our client before they step foot or even, you know, dig the golden shovel into the ground. So yeah, it's really become a tool that we use throughout our process. We don't use it we don't incorporate it specifically into our drawings for that reason, because it's not an engineering grade information, but it gives us more information than we usually have and validates a lot of the information that we'll receive from 811 and gives us that ability to validate the information that we're receiving from the field.
Yeah, this is great. Chris, I think I'm hearing you, I'm listening to you carefully, and I think there are a couple different point of views on how to evaluate the use of 4M. From one standpoint, and you talked about that at the beginning, is from an engineering design SUE standpoint on the pursuit phase and planning and designing work. And then from a different point of view, it will be from a safety standpoint or from a risk mitigation standpoint. And we're seeing many clients that are actually incorporating us as part of their SOPs and workflows, meaning every single project must be 4M'd. And that's part of the process. You don't have a project if you don't 4M it. And that's another tool that you have in your toolbox to QAC the data that you have in your process or in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. In the safety, and even from a safety point, when we get to that construction phase, that's something we have in the contractor's hands saying, here, this is the most up-to-date information possible. And for a contractor to be pretty secure in that information is really important, that they're not going to be digging in the wrong spot, or that they risk, you know, damaging lines to, you know, an Amazon facility or, you know, various things like that. It's been invaluable throughout our process.
We have some other questions here I can fire off. And Chris, I think this would be, well, I know this is would be great for you because it's talking about the Aspen project. So Joseph asked, how was the information provided for the Aspen project able to assist, given that the data available appeared to be from a limited viewpoint, specifically public utility records, and did not include most of the utilities that could exist on the air side of the airport?
No, that is one part that is missing in this one, is the air side, like the electrical throughout the runway. But it did identify a lot of the objects, the lighting along the runway. So because the public information the public information for this wasn't readily available. There's a lot of information as built that 4M did get incorporated into this project that have really helped sway their decision in using 4M as a go-by as we move into their construction season.
Yeah, and I think everything is transparent and open here, and I think it's really important to talk about this question, Joseph. I think that's a really good question by you. Going back to this project or to the Aspen project, the airport project that you showcased, Chris. Airport project won't act the same as a right-of-way project. That won't act the same as a military base, right? Our system will be perhaps limited or have a lack of coverage based on the use case. However, we need also to say very openly that the vast majority of the sweet spot of the product will be primarily along or nearby the public right-of-ways or streets. As we can see that this project that Chris, you guys used us on this project, and this will be the classic use case on using us. But even though when we go to the Aspen project, which is, excuse me, this one, even if we lack a coverage, essentially everyone will lack a coverage because there is nothing available. So even if you don't have the line work, at least getting those surface features that Chris, you talked about them, is a really good baseline to start your process without going to the field.
Yeah, agreed. We can infer from the object detection, we can infer a lot of what utilities are there. So we're not blindly sending our surveyor out there to guess where he's got to start picking up objects, or our locators when they're picking up the drainage system within the airport or the runway lighting. They know that these are connecting and gives them a good basis to go out there and be able to finish the work that would be missing in that space around the runway.
Yeah, just for instance, I filtered right now and removed all the lines and filtered only the surface features. This essentially tells us the story of the project using the surface or from the surface standpoint.
Roz, in that view that you were just in, there was another question from Nicole Williams. What format is the data released in? Is it GIS?
Yeah, another really good question. I'll go back to the screen here. As we can see here, we have this feature download where we can export the data to any forms of GIS features or any forms of GIS files. It can be exported to KML, shape files, KMZ, and so forth. We also have some add-ons that we can use. So we are providing CAD files, DXF, DWG, DGN with some add-on capabilities that we have. But secondly, we're also working behind the scenes on developing API. And I believe that within the next few weeks, maybe even a couple weeks, we should have API available to streamline our data to GIS and CAD platforms as well.
And a follow-up question to that, does it retain the metadata when that gets transitioned over and exported?
The answer is yes.
All right. All right. Let's see. We got some other ones here. Are you able to attain data that is not released to the public?
So I think we kind of answered that from a different angle a little earlier. Yes, the system, so the short answer is yes. The system will identify initially the data that is available in the public environment. We know that the data that's available in the public environment is not 100%. It's not everything. It is what it is. But yet, this is where the visual or the imagery science component will come to play, and it will supplement the data that is not publicly available. This essentially helps us to identify private data or data that is related to private utility owners and so forth. When you think about that, in any certain point of the past, few decades or so, any line that intersected with the public right-of-way at some point became available in the public environment through DOTs or utility owner or public owners that are releasing their RFPs and construction documents, schematics, blueprints, and so forth. And one point in time, at least, this private data was or became available in the public environment. And so if it was available or if it is available, the system will identify that and will be able to georeference and digitize this information and add that as part of the conflation process that I talked about beforehand.
Great. Another question that came in, are all the objects that we see on object detection, is that all the objects that we're going to detect, or are we going to be detecting more objects as time goes on?
Yeah, really good question. If I recall, right now we're able to identify manholes, inlets, valves, poles, hydrants, penistils, and so forth. Down the road, as we're speaking, we're right now training our machine learning algorithms to identify additional surface features. I think that one of the most interesting feature, not necessarily feature, but more a visual clue that we're right now are training our algorithms to identify is spray marks. And I'll just maybe jump to a really good use case that I like showing actually. Maybe I'll share my screen again. This is one of the projects we delivered to our clients where we're able to click on this manhole, see the item that we're able to identify, but also we're able to see the spray marks. Now, the system doesn't currently identify the spray marks automatically, but as we're speaking, we're training the machine learning to identify spray marks automatically. So within the few months, those are additional visual clues or evidences that we do see ourselves incorporating within our deliverables. And again, talking about the full picture or the story of the project using the on-surface phenomena or evidence to create the full story of the project.
All right. Another question regarding our data raws. How do you prevent duplications if you're collecting data from all these sources?
Yeah, really good question. So the way the back end of our system works, I spoke a lot about the conflation process and how we synthesize the information. So think about our ranking system based on credibility or the reliability of the sources. I think that the easiest way to explain that is let's assume that we're able to collect 5 different sources that will say a different thing about the same water line. So how do you know what is the most reliable source? Now, based on historical analysis that our system is able to do, we're able to identify the most reliable source that has the highest degree of credibility. Let's assume that this is source A. So the system will remove the other 4 sources and will stick with source A. Yet source A is not fully vetted. It's not vetted yet. But this is how we're incorporating the visual evidence or the imagery science to identify surface features. And then perhaps we're able to identify the manholes or the meters 4 feet away. And so we're able to adjust the record towards its precise location based on the visual component. So it is more about the amalgamation of everything together from the records throughout the blueprints and also the visual evidence that we spoke about before.
And the follow-up question was, how often is this data updated?
Yeah, I talked about that. Roughly on a monthly basis, we refresh the system constantly an ongoing or it goes to an ongoing refresh or mechanism on its backend. But we do update the database about a month on a monthly basis on a statewide basis. So every month, essentially, a statewide will get a refresh in our system.
And this goes back a little bit. This question was, do you then take the SU drawings from a client like Kimley-Horn after a project to incorporate it into your data to further validate, justify, verify?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll provide my short answer. Chris, I'd love also to, if you can chime in later on. The way we envision ourselves working with our clients is actually turning from a client-vendor relationship more towards a partnership relationship, where Forum essentially becomes the platform that houses the data, that maintains the data, becomes the digital repository of anything related to utility as the one-stop shop. So exactly as Chris, you described using us from the pursuit phase all the way up through pre-construction. I think you even spoke about construction phases. We do envision ourselves working, and we have clients that are working with us with this methodology of incorporating data from clients that can be presented only to the client's access. And so we're able to create this 360 feedback loop. Chris, just a second before maybe you will chime in, I'm happy also to provide a nice example of how this practically works, where we can see that, for instance, in this specific area, we can see that this is a water line we were able to provide using our system. Whereas when I click on this electric line, we can see that this line is only access to your specific organization because this line was provided to us from the client himself.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I can't speak to specifically how Kimley-Horn is going to incorporate their own data with 4M, but we, obviously from a SU's standpoint, being able for 4M to use our data with us, for future projects is going to be invaluable. That being able to close that loop, so to speak, and being able to use it and update that same information as we move forward we're able to go back to a project if need be and really kind of dig in if there's some type of asset management where they've got to go back and be able to reevaluate, having not only our information but 4M information accessible to us is very key to not driving the cost on a project, basically starting something all over again.
Yeah, Chris, I would like actually to answer a question to pile on this topic and about updatability and so forth. How often do you face scenarios where you're asked by your client to map an area and even with boots on the ground performing even a SUE investigation, and then let's say a couple months or even a couple years afterwards, you're asked again to go back to the field because design has been completed, but it was too early to put a shovel in the ground. That we have maybe a gap of months or 2 years that no one really know what happened during this period of time. And then sending again crews to the field and deploying, full-blown quality level B or so, it sometimes can be an overkill. How are you facing the scenarios?
Well, my answer to the first part of the question is often. We would see projects shelved for months on end and come back, and then the client expectation is to go back out there and redo it. And the ability to say, hey, no, we can use 4M, we will use their database from a month ago to reevaluate and determine if we need to go back out there. And oftentimes, that's not the case. So we're really saving the client that headache and that basically redoing the exact same work from a year or 2 years ago. We can revalidate that data, and still we might go back out there and survey again, but really from a SUE standpoint, we can see if there had been things that are updated, and then we know we have to go back out, or we have the ability to say, no, we've used this data, we've checked it against what we did previously. We don't need to go back out there and account for anything new. So that's really a good question, and has been really valuable in a lot of scenarios that we've run across, being able to just go back, reevaluate the area and say, no, we're okay. What we had previously, we validated, using 4M. Typically it includes boots on the ground to some degree, but we're using 4M to direct that, that conversation.
A really interesting point of view.
There was a really interesting question that came in around time and materials, T&M. I know this is a big conversation now. Chris, I think this would probably be good for you. What would be the best way to propose this technology like 4M, say to upper management if you were to charge T&M? Because I know that's something that most of the industry is using as a reference point, the T&M, and with AI, that could be kind of seem counterintuitive. How do you approach that, or how would you approach that?
I guess is the question how we approach.
How would you propose this technology to upper management if you typically charge for time and materials? Because this is saving you time. Yeah.
Right. Really, you've got to analyze what your time and material, like we were talking about with the status quo. It all kind of comes back to that, and how much time and effort are you putting in pre-proposal to investigating? How much time can you really do that? And that's up to, I would say, the individual SUE engineer, how much time they're really putting in. For us, it's a considerable amount of time that we're saving, and it's wildly efficient in that proposal phase. So going to our upper management to write the check, so to speak, we're showing that we're saving time. Our dry utility side with Justin Knowles is another great example. He is often, they are in construction phase digging, and they come across something that wasn't caught because he works on the private side, so SUE isn't required. So oftentimes he's getting a phone call, well, we found this fiber optic line. What do we do now? We don't know who owns it. We don't know who to call to relocate. So he's saving a ton of time being able to just pull up 4M. He has the utility owner. He can go right to whoever that utility owner is and say, hey, we need you to move this line, or we need to coordinate those fees. And so being able to do that in real time saves both of us on different spectrums, both of us hours and hours of research. So that's, while I don't want to put a number to it, we're all different. It having that capability immediately saves us a lot of man hours.
No, I think that from my point of view, at the end of the day, every single party, in order to be successful within a partnership, I think that in my humble standpoint, every single party needs to look at the other side point of view. So when I'm working with my clients, or we're working with our clients, we're always trying to understand how our clients can be successful using us, now how 4M can be successful. For instance, Chris, from Kimley-Horn standpoint, I would assume that you guys act many times as the prime. When you act as the prime, you want to look, you want to wear the hat of your clients. How the DOT or the municipality or the utility owner would be successful using Kimley-Horn services. And if you're able to position the type of goods and services you're using or technology they're using as and wrap it up in a way that it's going to make your client be successful because you're using those vehicles, this helps them to be successful, which helps you to be successful at the end of the day. And I think that this is a really good point of view on how to do that, because at the end of the day, every single party within the project lifecycle wants to have or has two different objectives, being on budget and on time. And as long as you're using softwares or services that correspond with those objectives, in my opinion, you're spot on.
Looks like we have time for about one more question here. Time flies when you're having fun, right, fellas? We're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour here. So thanks everybody who's stuck on for this long. We still have over 60 people here, so it's great to see you guys are getting value out of this conversation. A question came in from Clay. What is your deliverable process? Is the customer granted access to a region within your database, or do you give an export of the data in a requested file type, or is there a subscription system where the customer could have access to view the database? How does that all work?
Yeah, really quick answer. The interface that everyone is seeing right now, this is exactly the interface that a client will see when subscribing to 4M. And within that, every single point here represents a project that a user will draw, as well as the ability to filter them or sort them by specific folders and subfolders and so forth. So the entire organization can get access to this information. And so secondly, all the information, as we discussed, is exportable to GIS and also CAD with our add-on capabilities that people can use throughout multiple different systems. I think the question was also referring to the business side of the room. So in the nutshell, we're a subscription-based service. So we're a software company. And so we're marketing the product on a subscription based on the volume of usage that is anticipated to be used over the course of the year.
Thanks, Roz. Another question. How do you exactly mark the location of utilities if they are obstructed with something in satellite imagery, but visible in street view?
Really good question. So as you can imagine, we're not working with one single imagery data source. We're working with many dozens of sources or imagery sources that we're using. Some of them are publicly available, some of them we're subscribing to them, and some of them are proprietary sources that we're using. And then all the sources are georeferenced based on a base map that we're using as the ground truth that we have. So even if it is Street View or Google Maps or Hexagon or Digital Globe or Capella or whatever, everything is georeferenced towards a base map that we're using that is the ground truth that we're providing.
Do you have parcel and road data available?
Yes.
Great. So like I said, we're at the top of the hour here. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really hope that you found this insightful and thought-provoking. I know I did. I want to thank Chris Howard. Thanks so much, man, for hopping on and being
Absolutely.
And Roz, of course, friend and colleague as well. If anybody wants to learn more about 4M and everything that we just discussed today, I'm going to put in the chat here where you guys can request a demo. Our team would be more than happy to answer all your questions or answer any of the questions that we weren't able to get to today. So please book a demo with us. We'd be happy to hear from you. We really look forward to the next one with you guys. Please come back and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.